Lauren. All right, welcome, Full Stack Web 15. Yesterday we had a little bit of a technical difficulty with the video going bonkers. Hopefully my computer screen will not go full screen again. So this should be a lot more under control than the last video. So yesterday we talked about inline block, we talked about box model. And so what things should we keep from yesterday in our mental backpack going forward? Box model, box model, box model, box model. So let's go over it really quick. It's worth. So let's say we just have a box. I am a box. And we've got this div right here of a box. Let's go in our CSS. Let's just talk about each part. There's 4 parts of the box model, just to review really quick, because this does matter even in Flexbox and in CSS Grid. So if we come in here and we say box, and it doesn't have to be named box, okay? Like maybe that could be confusing to you. We can call this banana and it would still work. In fact, here we go. We're gonna say banana. So in this case, content is going to take up as much content given inside of this thing. We learned about display block though. So before we put a border on, we could actually put a background in here. Background color. And we could just say gray. Notice that because it's displayed block, it goes across the full screen, right? But notice how tall it is, the height of the element. It matches the content. Pretty cool. So if we want to constrain this or bring it in, we can use some properties that would be part of our part 1, which would be our content. And usually this is called like the content area. So I'm going to use width, and let's say we only want this to be 200 pixels. And our height, 200 pixels. Let me give you the code. Sorry, I forgot. I always forget to do that. Oh, thank you, Kai. Kai is really good at reading that URL. Thank you. I just realized that again. Okay, so content area 200 by 200. So now you can see that this box is now listening 200 to 200 in this box. Pretty cool. That is the content area. We went into padding. Now I'm going to go a little bit further into padding like I warned you yesterday. I'm going to talk about something really cool called box sizing. But we first have to review padding. So the next concept is from content to edge of border, right? That's what padding is. So if I use padding, our shorthand we learned about treble, top right, bottom left. If we do one value, it does all sides to be 20. And notice we now have 20 pixels padding between our content and the edge of our border. But here's the rub that we didn't want to address yesterday because there were so many new concepts. But I need to talk about it today. The space between here added pixels to the box. So let's do a little bit of math. I know it's dangerous to do math live. So we have 200 pixels wide plus padding on both sides. How wide is our box actually at this moment? 20, 200, 20. 240. Good job. See, even some of you said 220, right? Like, I do the same thing. I really, like, you've got to think about all sides. So we have 20 pixels on the left. So remember, we can figure this out real quick if we look at our box model in our computed. So here's our 20 on the left, 200, 20. So 20 plus 20 is 40, plus 200 is 240. Okay. And yes, we are 240 on both sides, top and bottom, because we're a square. So this is an annoying behavior because now you have to like think about the padding plus the content to find out how big a box usually is. Why is this annoying? Because designers are giving you design files that have specific widths on them. For example, I gave you a design file yesterday with specific widths, right? That constrained your proportions. And so if you didn't think about those widths, so let's say a designer came to us and said, this box needs to be 200 pixels, but I want to have 20 pixels padding between the edges. What would I have to do to accomplish what the designer said? That's right. I would have to account for the 40 extra pixels out of my width, 160. Isn't that annoying? That's so annoying that we have to do that. So guess what? There is a way. So let's go back to our 200. What we can do is we can actually use the border as our constraint instead of the outside of the content. So here's what we can do. It's a special property called box-sizing, and its value is border box. Now this is just weird. It's just weird, okay? You just got to memorize this weird thing. But it's not so weird. I mean, box sizing makes sense. We're telling how the box should be sized, but we're telling it to use the border of the box. Now, I'm going to uncomment this out. I commented and commented out. I want you to watch this box as I do it. So here's border box, commented, commented in. You see the difference? Pretty cool. So what border box does is it listens to our width and says, okay, how large and how high do you want me to be? And then that is where I will push the padding in from that angle. So this is really cool because instead of pushing padding out and making our width larger and we have to do all that crappy math, with box sizing border box, we can now push in from the border. This is really cool because now when designers give us boxes or shapes or paragraphs, we can know with a surety that when we say something is a certain width, if box sizing border box is applied, that our padding is going to go in and not out. So let's go look at what happened under the hood though. So if we look at computed, look what happened. The 160 automatically occurred for us. Isn't that cool? The math automatically happened. We didn't have to redo the math. Because we're humans, we make mistakes. Computers, they don't, unless humans tell them to. So in this case, the 160 automatically occurred because of box sizing. Now let me take it off again. Watch the 160. 200, see what's happening? Bring it back in, 160. So the math that we had to do to try to adjust for that is being handled by the computer and the browser specifically. Isn't that cool? Okay, so wouldn't we want box sizing border box on everything? Yes, we do. So guys, do you remember a selector that allows you to select everything? What is that selector? The star selector or universal selector. So if we come in here, and now we can say every element ever on the page, because remember, box model applies to everything, use box sizing border box. And this is the standard. This is what professionals do every time they build a site. You will see this little trick on everybody's site because nobody wants to do that extra math. It's just a waste of time. So there you go. That's box sizing border box. And I didn't want to talk about it yesterday because we had to focus on everything else. Ben says, does it matter if it's at the start or end? It does matter. It needs to be at the start. So remember, CSS cascades, right, Ben? So the lower on the page, the more specific. So we want box sizing border box to be very general, applied to everything. So when we talk about general styles, I want you to think top of the page. Okay, let's keep going down into border. Now, let's see what happens. Border, let's do 10px so we can see it, solid red. So if we go look at the border inside of our inspector tool, we can see that now it's even 140, right? So it went down even more from the edge of the border. So box sizing border box goes from the edge of the border in. So this border, these 10 pixels got added inside of that box. So we're still total 200 pixels. Okay? So just keep that in the back of your mind. And then margin. Margin allows us to adjust everything from the outside of the box, right? So margin, it's the same thing. We can use shorthand we talked about yesterday, but it gives us that bump that we need to get some spacing between our elements. So if we had multiple bananas, they would all be spaced accordingly. If we didn't have margin, everything would just be slapped next to each other. Okay, that is the box model review that I wanted to cover and box sizing border box. For now, I'm going to delete our little banana box here. Well, I'll comment it out just so we don't lose all the work we did. Let's see here. What happened there? Margin 20px. All right, now let's say // Oh, all of our comments are jacking it up, dang it. All right, I'm gonna get rid of these so you guys know what they are. And I'll comment the whole thing. There we go. Okay, let's move forward into Flexbox. Now, guys, Flexbox is so good. It's so much better. I'm so excited to teach it to you. It's going to make your life so much better. So we're going to come into curriculum. We're going to go to our introduction to user interface. Sorry, user interface 2. Whoa, 3. My bad. Okay. So you're going to be able, by the end of today, to describe and understand that Flexbox is a module. This is a really big concept. That's why it's an objective. We'll talk about this right now, actually. Demonstrate the understanding of Flex container properties and Flex item properties. Now, these are both part of the module that is Flexbox. All right. Flexbox Froggy is something I would love for you to do. Is, in my mind, required. Okay. Now, technically, at Lambda School, the only thing that is actually required of you is the sprint challenge being completed. Like, everything else is really optional, getting you prepared for the sprint challenge. So, for example, if you struggled yesterday with that concept and didn't get the assignment done, forget it and move on till today's assignment. And then if you get it done, then maybe go back and look at yesterday's. Like, that's how important it is to keep moving forward. In this case, with Flexbox Froggy, I would really like you, if you've not done this, would really like for you to do this after lunch on your own. It's a really good exercise in Flexbox. Also, there's this really cool GIF visualization of Flexbox. So after we talk about all the things that we do today, I want you to go in here, and it's just going to help solidify even more what we're doing. Super cool. All right. So here is the encyclopedia of how Flexbox is going to work. This is what I'm going to be using every day. I use this all the time. This is the reference. This is the reference. If some of you know Mozilla Developer Network, like, they're probably the #1 online learning resource for JavaScript and a lot of HTML and CSS. And what do? When you go to their Flex, they point you back to here. That's how important this valuable Flexbox tutorial is from CSS Tricks, specifically Chris Coyer. Amazing developer, amazing teacher. And I've used this over and over, and it really helps. Like, this is amazing to come back to, and it's so well documented. Like, you know, I'm going to add more content in the training kit, but this thing really just kills it. This is the best reference on the internet for Flexbox. The only problem with this is when you first come here, if you came here on your own, this is what I did. I went from left to right because English, right? So I read this, and I read it kind of like this. I went display to order, and it was a nightmare going between display and order when I first started learning this a long time ago and reading his documentation. I was so confused. And so understand that the left side is purple, and it's meant to be read up and down. The right side is orange and is meant to be read up and down. That was a huge gotcha. So you're not supposed to read left to right. It's up and down. I guess he had to do it. He wanted to do a side-by-side comparison. Okay, so it seems obvious, but it wasn't to me. All right, so basically, we have to understand that Flexbox is a module. And what a module is not just one property. So what I mean by that is, if we go back to our code here, and let's just open up, I'm going to do a header. Let's just do a simple navigation at this point. Keep it super simple. So we'll do nav, and we'll have our 4 A tags like we always do, just to give us something to work with. So we'll just do home, about us, all that good stuff. And by the way, when we're using A tags to move around to different pages, we can pop the URL inside of here. So for example, on your assignment today, you're going to have multiple pages. And so you can actually pass in the page's HTML reference. So you're going to have a services page, by the way. And so the way you would pass that href across is by putting in the reference to the file in the href, the hypertext reference link. I'll be discussing this after lunch today. Okay, so we'll do home, about, blog, and contact. Just kind of your normal run-of-the-mill stuff. Now, does anybody know why these four things, these four items, are already lining up next to each other? Do you remember from yesterday? That's right, Sean. Inline. Good job, Andrew. Inline. Very good. Very good. So the reason that we know this stuff is working the way it is because they are inline. Very good. Okay, so let me talk about, let's grab our nav element. And this is where things already change a little bit. So for example, what I mean by that is if I wanted to change those A tags, I come in here, I say nav, I say A, I build my specificity chain, right? And then I can start manipulating a color. I could say like, okay, you need to be red. And I go red, right? And so we're used to manipulating the direct object. Well, Flexbox is a little bit unique. Because it's a module, it actually turns on multiple properties at the same time. So you know how we learned about display property yesterday? That was like display block or inline. We also learned, well, it's in the training kit, but I don't know if we talked about it, but display none will actually remove content out of the page. But it's only doing one thing. The display property is doing one thing. It's like displaying none, displaying block, displaying inline block, right? Like we learned about this. Well, there's a new one that we're going to learn today called Flex. The interesting thing about what I just did here is by saying display flex, I have now told the browser I now want to access a module of CSS. So a module is a bunch of different properties combined together that work in a certain way. So in this case, by saying display flex, I'm now actually opening up all the commands that we see here inside of this guide. Okay, so that's totally different than like display none. Display none does one thing. When we use a Flexbox module, we're actually gaining access to a slew of things. And that slew is right here. So this is called the basics and terminologies of our Flexbox module. So in this case, since Flexbox is a whole module and not a single property, it involves a lot of things, including its whole set of properties. Okay? Some of them are meant to be set on the container, known as the Flex container, whereas others are meant to be set on the children Flex items. Let's talk about that really quick in detail. So, based on what we just read, there's a parent and a child relationship going on here. What is the parent element in this relationship of hierarchy right now? That's right, the nav. What is the children? What are the children elements, I should say? The A. Very good. This seems elementary, but guess what? It's not, because now we can use these in different ways. So the parent is known as the Flex container. Okay? So we've got to use the same terminology that they're using. And the items individually are Flex items. Okay? This only occurs because we said display flex on the nav. So, critical thinking hats on. If we put display flex on the A tag, what is the child of the A tag? Yes, the content. Very good, Sean. Very good, David. So in this case, home would be the child, and the parent or the Flex container would be the A tag. So guess what? Flexbox does not go more than one deep. Let's get that really early. Flexbox does not bleed its properties more than its children. So that means that this home tag right here is unaffected by our current Flexbox styling right here. So like this display flex, it's only hitting the parent and it's only hitting the child. It's not hitting the grandchild, which is actually home. Okay? So this will make more sense as we keep going, but I need you to understand now, flex box is only one deep. It goes just to its children. It doesn't have a grandchild property. Okay, when we do the flex box module, when we say display flex, we gain all of this stuff right here in this graph. So flex box, in a regular layout, is based on both block and inline flow directions, which we just did yesterday. So we learned that yesterday. The flex layout is based on a flex flow of directions. Please have a look at this figure from the spec, explaining the main idea. So this is right from the W3C spec. So over here, we have a flex container. So in our example, we know that's what? Nav, right? So our flex container is nav, and then our flex items are the A tags. So just keep that in context here. At the leftmost side of our flex container, we have what's called a main start. We also have a main end. So what's happening here is there is a flow at which this is going right now. Our content's always going to flow a certain direction. Let's just prove it really quick. So if I add another item, knowing the flow, it should add it at which direction I'm pointing. So let me get my annotation tool out here. So that flow that we just saw in our graph is going this way, right? So we are flex flowing one direction, that flex direction. So guys, this is really cool because we can control and always have in our mind which area we're pointing to, which direction we're flowing into. And so with like inline block and all that crazy stuff, sometimes we didn't know where we were. We didn't know where we were flowing. With Flexbox, we always know because we actually tell it where to go. Conversely, we can also tell it to go this way. We can actually have it flow down. Now, can we have it flow both ways? No, the flow is not going to flow both ways. But we can actually adjust items on both axes. That's right, Sean, not at the same time. Grid can do that, but not Flexbox. So if we come over here, you'll see there's another arrow pointing the opposite direction. This is known as the cross axis. The cross axis is exactly what you think. It's perpendicular to the main axis and goes opposite the cross. This is really powerful. We'll get into this in a second. But for now, I want you to focus on the main axis. Okay, so our main axis. All right, let's get into some code. So down here, properties for the parent. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste these properties and use them in our code. We already did display flex, so we're already there. This defines a flex container, inline or block, depending on the given value. So you can actually say, I want this to be an inline flex item if you wanted to use flex properties inside of a paragraph, for example. So that's pretty cool. So if you wanted to like put an image inside of a paragraph and control it with flex layout, you can. But the default value is going to be a flex with a block mentality, meaning it's going to take up the whole screen, the whole width. Okay, here we go. Flex direction. This is new stuff. So I'm going to copy and paste this in here. Like this. I'm just going to comment it out so we can reference it. Okay, so in this case, the property is called flex direction. Notice that I'm on the parent, right? I'm on nav. So all these properties are flex container only. Remember, because we're on the left. So over here, everything here is a properties for the parent flex container. And in our case, that's nav, right? Our flex container. So that's why we're adjusting properties on the nav. So here's our flex direction. We can tell it where to go. So in this case, see these little arrows? They're saying, here's how it works. You can use row, row reverse, column, and column reverse. Let's go try it out. So everybody, let's do this together. Make sure you're following along with me. Take this code. I've got it saved. So here we go. Let's type in row together. Wah, wah. Feels like nothing happened. That's because, oh geez, sorry. Woof. Sorry. Flex direction row is the default value. So watch what happens. Let me get rid of my extra contact. It's kind of like annoying, hurting my OCD. So we have these 4 items. Okay. So flex direction row. Watch what happens when we do row reverse. Everybody type with me. Like, you guys should get fingers on keyboard right now. I want you all to type with me. Row reverse. So watch what happened there. We just swapped home, about, blog, and contact. So our arrow, the direction in which we are flowing, now is going this way. Isn't that crazy? So notice that home is on the end. It's at the very end. That is because we changed the direction. We changed the flow of our code. Pretty cool. So now that we've seen that, let's check out the other properties. Whoops. So let's type in column here. Column. Aha, look at that. So now let's not misunderstand what happened here. We didn't display block and all these things just changed. That is not what happened. What we did is we pushed everything down and we flowed down this way now. So that's pretty cool because now our flow is pointing down when we use column. And then of course, column reverse is going to do exactly what you think. It's going to point up. So let's try it out. Column dash reverse. So do you see what happened there? Our contact is now at the top, our home is at the bottom, and it just reversed the order. All right, so how much am I using column reverse? Very little. How much am I using row reverse? Very little. How much am I using row and column? Quite a bit. So row and column are like the two big winners here, but these other pieces, they do matter, and they are part of the toolkit of using a Flexbox module. Andrew says, does this challenge all the space that is to the right of the container? Oh, change. Does this change all the space to the right? No. So it's still just a big block item. So if we were to put a border around this, just to see where we are, we would see that it goes across the page because remember, it's still just a block level. That's why all the stuff we learned yesterday doesn't go away. It's just now it's added on to. So it's still a block level item, but now inside of here we have the Flexbox module that we can access. David says, what significance is row if default flex direction is already from left to right? They just want to be able to give you the ability to overwrite something if you need to. So that's why, because you might need to overwrite it later. Okay. So there it is, my friends. I'm going to keep it on row because I want to keep this default flow for a second as we continue to explore. Jasmine asked a really good question. What made it no longer be inline block? Why are they all on different lines now? Jasmine, the answer to that is they are now technically flex items and not the other pieces. So flex items allows us, so remember, this is a module. So at the very tip top, we now have flex items because we said display flex. So the answer to your question, Jasmine, is this line right here. Because we said display flex, we then created flex items inside of our A tag. Pretty cool. Okay, let's keep going forward. We're just getting started. Okay. So now that we've got our row going in the right direction, we want to learn how to wrap content that it goes down to the next line. So let me grab this stuff right here. I'm going to comment it right here. And we'll just introduce this. So flex wrap, the default value is no wrap. So let's watch what happens as we add a bunch of items because we can't see anything happen here. And by the way, we can add a width to make this, well, let's just add a bunch of items. Just so you can see how cool this is. So see what happens here. And let's make nav have, actually let's add a constraint. So I'm gonna add a width of like 500 px. So you can see that this content is not wrapping, right? That is because the default value of Flexbox modules is no wrap. And so it's not going to wrap anything for us, which honestly, I usually end up using wrap every time. So it's kind of annoying that no wrap's the default. I kind of wish wrap was the default. But for their own reasons, they did that. And so the next item we can look at is called wrap. So wrap is going to respect the bounds to which we've set. So let's see what happens. Look at that. Now, no matter how many items I add, which are many items here, so let's just double the items, it's going to wrap forever. We've basically gained responsiveness with this one command. It's like that powerful. So now it's going to wrap depending on how big our width is. So if we make our width 300, watch what happens. It's going to wrap as much as it can. And then 600, 700, like it's just going to stay inside of its content until it can't anymore. And even then, it's going to be fine. Isn't that cool? So flex wrap is like automatic responsiveness. James says, does row equal main axis and column equal cross axis? No. If we're talking about flex flow, so depending on what you do for your flex direction, so if we change this to column, column is our new main axis. If we change it back to row, row is our new main axis. So flex direction sets the main axis. The cross axis is just perpendicular. We're going to get to that really quickly here, though. So bear with me, James. It's going to make more sense as we introduce more concepts. Exactly. Tyrone says it sets the way it flows. But Tyrone, I want you to really understand that it really is setting the main axis. It's the same thing you said, but I want you to make sure you understand it technically. So with flex wrap, wrap reverse, well, you can guess what's going to happen. It's going to reverse the order in which it wrapped. The problem is, can't really see anything change because our box isn't big enough. But it is reversing. So wrap reverse, again, I don't use it very often. I'm using wrap quite a bit, okay? All right, so let me get rid of some of this junk. It's just so much fluff on our page. I just wanted to show you that. By the way, if there's nothing to wrap, it's not gonna wrap, right? So we only have 4 items. Okay, so that's flex wrap. Let's go down to flex flow. So flex flow is a shorthand flex direction and wrap combined together. It's just a helper. But guys, I don't know. I don't really like this. I don't feel like you need to memorize this, but I want to let you know about it anyway. So flex flow is just shorthand. And the first item is going to be the direction, which we know is going to be up here, right? So we're going to have row, and then the next one's going to be wrap. So this will replace these two. Like we don't need these two anymore by using flex flow. It's just a helper, okay? Meaning it was made purely for convenience, just like shorthand. So just keep that in the back of your mind. You know, we'll keep it here just because it's alleviating us from having to write these two properties, but it's just shorthand. That's all it is. Okay, justify content. This is where things get interesting. So, I mean, everything's been interesting, but this is where things get really interesting with layout. So you can see that these orange pieces inside of this purple piece, they represent flex items. So these flex items are being moved around inside of their parent in these interesting ways. So this defines the alignment along the main axis. It helps distribute extra free space left over when either or all the flex items are inflexible or are flexible, okay? That can be really confusing. So really what I want you to understand is that this controls layout based on the main axis of whatever you're coding. So when you hear justify, think main axis. So, and this rule applies to both items and container. So if you're taking notes, this is the time to write this down. Justify is equivalent to our main axis. Justify, main axis, okay? Make sure you get that in your notes somewhere. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab all these, and then after this, we'll take a break. So we come down here, grab all our properties, so we just don't have to come back and reference them. And so at this point, we're going to type. So everybody, you should be typing with me. Remember, we're doing this together. Justify dash content, colon, semicolon. And then let's start the first value, flex dash start. Again, it doesn't seem like anything occurred because this is going to be our default value on the main axis. But now let's do flex end. Oh, ho, ho, look at that. So what happened here is we've now justified all of our content over to the right side of our main axis. Isn't that cool? Here's where it's different than row reverse. Row reverse actually reversed which way it was pointing, so contact was flipped over here with row reverse. But with flex end, it doesn't touch any of the items, it just moves everything to the right side of the container. So this is super powerful if we want to move content around across our boxes. Okay, so flex end. Now, if I used column, is this content going to be at the top of the page or the bottom of the page? Top or bottom? Okay, I'm seeing bottom, seeing some top. Let's try it out. So we'll change our flex flow here. We'll say column. Well, the hard thing right now is that our height is not set, right? So it's really hard to see. So let's introduce a bigger height. Let's do like 400. Now you can see better what's going on here. So at the bottom of our content, we're now going to the end of our main axis. So remember, because we used column, we now are pointing down this way, right? So column equates to a downward motion here. That's where our flow is. And so if we're going to the end of our flow, this makes sense. So then let's change it back to flex start. And you can see it goes to the top of the flow, the beginning of where the arrow came from. Guys, hopefully this is like, you're going, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Because this is so cool. Like, I hope you don't I don't take this for granted. This is really, really cool stuff. So I'm going to change it back to row because we all think, I think, easier left to right. But at least now you know that column has the same exact functionality. We'll do 200 so we don't have this massive box. Okay, so that's flex start, that's flex end. But now we can center. Oh man, here we go. Oh, doesn't that feel nice just to type center and it doesn't matter if it's inline or block because it's a flex module. So we can just center things. Oh, this is so nice. I hope you guys understand how nice this is. It took me decades to finally get Flexbox. It's so nice. Let me hit save. Andrew, make sure you grab my stuff and refresh and compare notes with what you got. So in this case, justify content center. Centers all the content inside of our main Flexbox module. So anyway, I don't think I need to beat center anymore. It's amazing. Let's talk about space between. Let's see how this works. This is where things get really cool. So space between will actually put equidistance between each Flex item inside of the Flex container. Oh, that's awesome. So now we have equal distance here, like this distance. So let me get out the old drawing tool here. So the distance from here to here is the same distance from here to here. It even accounts for like contact having more characters in it. Mathematically, these are going to be equal. I love that. Like Flexbox, oh, I love it so much because these are all equal now. That's what space between does. Super powerful. Okay, let me show you how space between can be used really, really cool, in a really cool way. So let's say like yesterday, you guys had like a logo and some navigation, right? So here's an H1, we'll just say logo. what we could have done is we could have popped this, and actually it looked like this, right? It was like header nav, but bear with me. We could put another div in here called like nav container. And then we could put all our A tags in here, and it would give us an equal distance of space between. And so then we could have easily put our logo. Let me get this so it's not so gross looking. There we go. So now we could have just had our logo on the left and our navigation on the right without any floats or positioning. Absolute, like just one command, space between, gave us everything. So cool. And my friends, box model is still valuable. Watch this. So if I say nav A and I put margin on all of these navs, watch this. This is so cool. It automatically accounts for your box model. Look at that. So it does all the box model calculations for you, and it still works for all the things that you need to do. So cool. Anyway, so now all the space in between here is being controlled by our 10px. By the way, if we didn't want that, we could apply another flex box layer to our nav container. Anyway, I'm going to go back to our original example. I just wanted to show you yesterday how nice that was compared to, or how awful it was yesterday compared to today. All right, so we're back to our space between. Nadeem, the answer is because the children were actually still inline elements. So that's why. In that last example I gave you. They weren't flex items yet. Okay, good. I'm really impressed though that you saw that. So notice that I've still got my space. Do you guys see now? Watch this. If I delete this, oh yeah, it's still accounting for the margin even with space between. So cool. I'm going to comment it out for now just so everything's vanilla. Yeah, Trevor says, yeah, if you can hear the relief in my voice, it's because I did this for a decade with just floats and inline block. And this is like sweet, sweet goodness. All right, so space between, and then let's do space around. So space around gives us equal spaces around each element. It's quite literal. So the space here and the space here are the same. Okay, does that make sense? Like that's one space. And then the space here and the space here are the same. And then the space here and the space here. You see what I'm getting at here? So space around, I think, is confusing to new developers because they're like, how is it different than space between? And I'm saying, here is the difference. It's giving equidistant space around the element instead of between the elements. Okay? So this, my friends, is why space around is different. Let me throw space between in. You can see the difference with my annotation. My annotations up there. So you see how totally different that is right there? They're not the same at all. So space between is equidistance between each element. Around creates little bubbles of padding around each element. Okay, hopefully that's clear. Then the last one, which is actually a new property and doesn't work in every browser, is space evenly. Space evenly is probably what you thought the other two were trying to do. It does equidistance around each item. So where space around gave space between each one, space evenly makes sure that every space here, these guys are all equivalent. So that's the difference between the three. Space between is literally the giant space between or small space between. Space around provides space, white space, around each element, and space evenly does an even space between each element. All of them have their use cases, but don't worry about it. Just play with all three, and you'll figure it out with whatever project you're working on. Like sometimes one makes more sense than the other. Okay, that is it. Before we need a break. because we've been slamming this stuff hard. So let's take a 5-minute breather. When we come back, we're going to keep going down our Flexbox module. 5 minutes. Step away from the computer. Take a break. What the heck? That's not where I wanted to go. 5-minute timer. Okay, it's running now. All right, come on back to your computers. Let's keep going down the route of Flexbox. Okay, before we keep going, are there any confusions or anything that's like lingering now that you've seen more things in action? Are there any more confusions I can dispel? Anything I can help with before we keep going? Okay. Addison says, hey, space around versus space evenly. So again, let's talk about this. So I think the best way to do it is to draw. So I'll draw it on here for you. So right here and right here, these spaces are even. And right here, like forever and always. Given this many elements, this space, these are all going to be equidistance, okay? So that's space evenly. Got it? Space evenly. Now, watch what happens when I do space around. So let me draw a different color here. So space around has equidistant space right here, and right here. And then, of course, it repeats itself over and over. See that? I'm drawing awful slow, but so each one of these spaces, these are all equal. So notice the red spaces, that's space evenly, space around is around each element, giving a little cushion. There isn't a logo. Nick, I don't see a logo. Sorry. Oh, you're probably thinking about the example I gave you. So make sure you refresh your page. There's no more logo. Okay, does that help, Addison? Space around is the red, or sorry, is the blue. Space evenly is the red. And guys, don't lose sleep over this one. Like, don't be like, oh my gosh, I don't know the difference. I can't see it. I don't understand it even though you've explained it. Don't worry. Just keep going forward. Try those things out and see if they work for you in your code. All right. So let's come back to where we were going over here. We have our justify now. Do you remember what I told you? What axis in the flex module is applied to justify? What axis? When you hear the word justify, you think main. That's right. Justify, main, justify, main. Very good. All right. Now we get to the next axis, align. So align, when you hear align, you need to think cross axis or the perpendicular axis in the flex module. So when you hear align, you think cross, align, cross, align, cross. Okay, so what's going to do is we can actually manipulate things on the vertical axis if we're using row and the horizontal axis if we're using column. Pretty cool. So let's go see how this actually works. So we'll come in here. And by the way, we can use align content and or justify content and align items at the same time. So here we go. Align items. And let's do flex start. Hopefully you're following along with me and typing with me so you can experience this and ask questions. So in this case, flex start, looking good. But now let's try flex end. Oh, look at that. So I'm going to draw the cross axis in blue. This is the cross axis. And then I'm going to draw the main axis in red. Okay, see the difference? So directionally, we're going on the align items, so we're on the blue arrow. Justify content is on the red arrow. So if I change this to be like flex end, you can see that it's on the right side of the arrow. And then we're using flex end on the blue side of the arrow inside of our container. So it's going to give us the furthest most positions to the bottom right. See how that works? Or if we do flex start on the red arrow, it's going to be over here. If we did flex start on the blue arrow, it's going to be at the top of the arrow. Does that make sense? So align is blue, main is red. Okay, let's keep going down this. So centering, you guessed it. It's so much easier now. We can center things. Oh, that was so awful yesterday, wasn't it? It was so awful to center things, to try to, especially with block level elements. It's no longer hard. It's just center, center, using both the axis. So in this case, we have the justify red arrow, red axis, and the blue, and you can see right in the middle. There we go, center, center. I really hope you understand how amazing that is. I really do. Because a lot of people don't. So center is amazing that we could just magically say it and it works. Center, center. Okay. Baseline gets a little weird. Baseline is interesting. So if I type baseline, it's like, what the heck just happened? Yes, Tyrone, everything I'm talking about will work with images, divs, whatever, p tags. It all works. Yes, Jasmine, Flexbox is responsive if you use Flex Wrap. Okay, so, and use a %-based container. That's one gotcha. We'll talk about that next week, though. So home about blog, baseline. What the heck is baseline? Well, baseline goes off of the base of an individual text item. Man, that's kind of weird. Let's go look and read it for a second. So items are aligned such as their baselines align. Let me get rid of those arrows. So what is a baseline? Well, it's all related to text. So the text and where it stands, everything tries to align with that text. So to help us visualize this, I'm going to make our A tags. We're going to mess around with them a little bit. So we'll come in here and we'll say each individual A tag. So let's add a class on each one. I'll do this really quick and then you can just update. So we'll say home. Then we'll do about blog contact. So if we added a style specifically to like our contact, so we'd go nav, and then we could say a dot contact. Let's say we had a margin top. Well, actually, we need to make sure they're displayed block, otherwise we can't do a lot of stuff with our items here. So if we said margin top 20px, see how I only put it on one item. Like, this is really important to understand what I just did here. I only put a margin top on my A tag, but everything else tried to follow it because I'm displaying baseline. Now, because A tag is inside of here, if I get rid of baseline, let's see what happens. Let me just get rid of this. Do you see what happens? Contact is on its own. It's like jumping down by itself, doing its own thing. Well, if we use baseline, it'll make sure that no matter what we've done, all of the text items will line up on the same line. You might be going, why the heck is that important? Like, what a confusing but cool property. Well, I don't disagree with you. It is confusing and cool. Oftentimes, this is used when you want to have like your logo on the far left line up with your nav on the far right. And you want them to have the same baseline between them. So that's an example of when you could use baseline. But again, it's lightly used, and mostly for that exact scenario that I just told you. So don't lose sleep over baseline. Just understand that it's regarding the bottom of a text. So this bottom line right here, that's the baseline. Okay. Out of all the things we've taught, that's probably the most like, what the heck? So don't worry about that one. Just know that it works. So Max says, what if the baseline items have different sizes? So you're saying, what if contact had a different font size? Like this. So notice where the baseline is, Max. I'm really glad you asked that. The baseline is the bottom of the text. Hence, baseline. Makes sense, right? Okay, so that's baseline. Again, don't lose sleep. Don't think that you don't know what you're doing if that doesn't make sense. Just understand that it has to do with the bottom of the text lining up. Okay, stretch is actually the default value, which is interesting, on aligned items. So stretch doesn't make a lot of sense unless we had a background color to see how this is doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say background color gray, and you can see stretch now is stretching the element all the way to the bottom. This is the default value. This is like what every align items comes with if we set it up. So watch this. If I do flex start, notice how the gray did not stretch to the bottom anymore. Or if I do flex end, notice the background color is constrained. So stretch stretches the element all the way out like that. It's the default. So for example, if I delete this item, the default value is stretching, like always. Okay? So there you go, my friends. That's align items. It's the cross axis or the perpendicular axis. Okay, so let's flip our brains a little and try column out with this. Column. See what happened? It's perpendicular, right? So what happened here is we have our annotation. Where's our main axis? Before I write it, where's our main axis? Is it top to bottom, bottom to top? What is it? What is our main axis when we use column? Top to bottom. Very good, very good. So top to bottom. And then remember our perpendicular axis, or our align, is left to right, because we used column. So all these rules apply. So let's kind of goof around with this again. If I change this to flex end, you can see it's going to go to the end of our main axis. If I do center, I get the same result, center, center. Sure thing, Andrew. I just hit save, thanks. Holden says, if you had a parent element with 7 children and you wanted the layout to look something like evenly spaced dashes, the first and last elements are aligned but below the baseline. Is there a way to override the align item for those 2 specific children? There is. But if you use baseline, it won't, like if there's text involved. If there's text not involved, you can do it individually. Does that make sense? Okay, I see you nodding. Okay, so over here with align items, here's our last, this is our last property. We've made it. We made it to the end of container. And there's only going to be 2 properties we're going to talk about with items, so we're cruising. So in this case, align content is a bunch of items being on the cross axis. So this is a little bit different. So align items is individual items, like 1, 2, 3, like we've been doing. Align content is like a whole grep or a whole group of items. So it allows us to move a whole bunch of items up or down or left or right or center. It's pretty cool. But I don't want you to get confused. A lot of people, when they first learn this, go, man, I wish align content didn't exist. Like, it's kind of confusing. I'm like, no, it's really not. It's just a bunch of items. It's the whole slew. So let's go try it out. It'll make more sense as we play with it. So we're going to come down here. We're going to introduce align content. So I'll say align dash content. Notice it's not align items. They can both exist. But align content, let's see what happens. So we're going to do flex dash start. And notice what's happening over here. All of our content's not changing. Because align items, well, we don't really have enough content to change. So that's one of the problems. So if we did like flex end, align items is also going to grab everything. So you know what? Align items and align content. They can exist in different pieces individually, but if you're trying to do a big layout, use one or the other, like on your big layout pieces. So watch this. Align. So we'll do flex start again. And it's going to take all these pieces. Now watch what happens. Align content needs enough content to actually do something. So if we have like a ton more content to take up space, and then we had a bigger height to mess with. Okay. So within our align content, and we say flex start, and then let me make sure we go back to row so we're not on column anymore. And then let's make sure, yep, we're wrapped. Okay, sweet. We still need more content though, dang it. Content needs a lot. It needs basically wrapped content to work. Otherwise it won't kick in. There we go. So actually it's a good lesson right there. So you need enough content that it's actually wrapping and needs to be moved around. Otherwise align content will not turn on. So flex end will now bring all of our content to the end. Center, we'll center it. If we do space between, it'll actually do equidistant space between all of our content, space around. So it's just like justify content in that it has these properties that don't exist with align items. So let's make sure we understand a big clarity between our two aligns. Align items is our individual items inside of there. They're doing like flex start, flex end, center, baseline. Align content gives us the same kind of spacing that we gained when we did justify content, right? It's just on the cross axis now. So our justify content is centering everything based on where it is, whereas align content is our perpendicular axis. So remember, if I draw the arrows again, we're using row. So this is align content. It's giving us our vertical reach. So if I delete align content, our vertical reach automatically goes to stretch. That's why we get the gray background. And so that's why if we want to see something go to the start, we do flex start or flex end. So it's like, think about this as a bunch of elements moving around in groups. That's align content. Versus, so if we take this and we comment it out, and we bring back in align items, this is going to try to align all of our items individually. So if we did like flex start, you can see that it's totally different than align content. So remember, you've got to have a boatload of content for align content to even matter, to even work. Whereas with align items, you can only have like 4 items and it'll do the job like this. Okay, so align content, the precursor to this is you have to have enough content that flex wrap is working. It's on. All right, that is the last thing that you need to know and have in your toolkit. How often am I using align content? Very little, not very often. There's not often that I want to move a whole section of content up or a whole section of content down vertically or even horizontally. But at least I know about it and can use it when I need to. So guys, I'm really trying to get you guys a tool bag. And so in this tool bag, you can pull out, okay, for this one project, I remember Flexbox does this. So then you go over here to your guide and you reread the guide and you figure it out. Like, that's how it is in the real world. I don't have all this stuff memorized 24/7. I don't. There's not enough space in my brain. The plasticity won't allow it. I've got way too much stuff that I'm trying to think about. I just need to know where I need to go when I need to memorize 1 or 2 things. So like for me with Flexbox, I know like the 15 things that are really valuable to me. And I throw out the rest. And I just know that I can come back here if I forget. Like that's real development right there. All developers act the same way. Like I can't think of anybody else that just memorizes every property. Like it's just too much. Now, you know a little bit about it, but just understand, like, don't be intimidated by all these properties. Just know where to go to get them right here. Okay. James says, it seems like if you separate content enough with divs, you would never need to use line content. I don't disagree with you, James. I think that's a good observation. But of course, it's there if you need it. David says, is it accurate to say that justify determines the main while a line works with the perpendicular axis? Or is it accurate to say that justify is on the x while the align works with the y? David, I'm going to say none of those. And I would say it's accurate to say justify works with the main axis and align works with the cross axis. That is what I would say to you, David. So don't get your wires crossed trying to think perpendicular or not. Think cross and main, because your flex direction controls all of that. So now that we've spent some time with this, our flex direction is really powerful. It really determines where our flex is going to go. It's where it's going to flow. And so in this case, this is going to be row, row reverse, column, column reverse. There's only 4, so it's not that crazy. These blue arrows represent the main axis direction. And then at that point, the cross axis is going to be perpendicular. So just get that, make sure that's solid, David. I think you're on the right track, but I want you to use the right terminology, main and cross. Okay. Anything else I can ask or answer you before we move on to our individual flex items? Anything on the left side that's still confusing? And remember, these properties, that's why I put them in the code here, so we don't have to remember them. We can just go back, read them. Okay, oh, that's what it did. Oh, yeah, that's what it did. Okay, sweet, sweet, sweet. Like, that's what you got to do, is take each item one at a time. Okay. I think I've answered all the questions that I've seen. If I missed one, just rewrite it, please. All right, now we're going to go into the items themselves. So everything we've done, notice it's crazy, but everything we've done is only on one selector this whole time, the flex container. So this nav item is the only place we've been writing this whole hour, is the nav item. Isn't that crazy? So now what we're going to do is we're going to introduce ourselves to the individual items. So home, about, blog, contact. The reason I put classes on them is because it's much easier to reference them instead of trying to do nth child or something silly for each item. So adding classes on each individual item is A-OK. So I'm going to go ahead and add 4 references here. And I'm going to do home, about, blog. I'm just matching my class names. Contact. So just to make sure it's crystal clear, I'm just saying home goes to home. About goes to about. Blog goes to blog, etc. Okay, that's all I'm doing. Now, do I need the A in front of here? No, I don't need the A in front of here. It just makes it super specific and kind of hits home the idea that you're using an element. So I'll keep it here for this example, but we don't need it. It's just fine if we didn't have it. So let's test this out and let's see if this is actually working. I'm going to change the color of my home to red and see if it shows up. And there it is. I'm going to get rid of my gray color for now, so we can see our navigation system here. Okay, so I still have all of my parental controls on here, so I've still got my Flexbox module enabled, right? Like this has to be on, otherwise the children don't have access to these container properties over here. So the first thing we're going to look at is one of the most fascinating things I've seen in CSS in a long time. Like everything I've showed you is like, yeah, okay, cool. This is crazy. So what we can do with order is we can actually change the source order. So source order is the order in which you write your HTML. So home, about, blog, contact, all this stuff I've written in a certain way, in a certain order. This is called the source order. This source order can be a pain in the butt when you're trying to develop and a designer comes in and says, you know what, I know you got the whole web page done, but I want you to swap these two elements only on mobile. And you're just like, I hate you. Because you have to think about all these different things that you have to swap in and out, display none, media queries. You're just like, you get really mad at your designer. You're just like, come on. Well, source order or order inside of CSS allows me to go, okay, cool, boss, you got it. And then I can go do it in 5 seconds. It's awesome. So let's see how this works. So you can actually take the order of elements and change based on the integer. So it's literally just an integer. Now remember, integers can be negative numbers. So you can actually use negative source order, and we'll talk about that right now. So let's try it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say home, order, and the default value of our order is 0. So nothing changed here. But watch what happens when I put a new integer in here. Watch the red. And in fact, let me make this just a little bit bigger. This is very important to understand. So watch this. I'm going to change my first item to order 1. What the? It went to the back of the line. Well, that does make sense because the source order 0 is going to be closer to 0. It is 0, right? So it's, all these other ones are 0 by default. So 0, 0, 0, they're all less than 1. So that's why 1 went to the back of the line. Does that make sense? Why 1 went to the back? Because these 3 are actually 0. Okay, let's keep going. So let's say I wanted about to be after number 1. Well, what do you guys think? What's the number after 1? What should I do for my source order here? What number is going to allow it to be after home? 2, that's right, Thomas. Boom. Isn't that cool? It's the next item in the order. And then we come in here and we can say order. What's after 2? 3. There it is. And then order 4. And now we have our original lineup again. But this time we are totally controlling the order in which we are introducing these elements. So I could swap number 4 and number 2 really quickly now if I wanted to. So now contact is in the 2nd spot and about is in the 4th spot because I'm totally controlling the order at this point. This is insane. The fact that I can do this in CSS is just bonkers. All right, this is super cool. Nadeem says, hey, could we use 10, 20, 30 instead of, yeah, it's just an integer. So it's just looking for an integer, but I would recommend you don't do that. Keep it simple. Okay, hopefully you're just going, wow, that's really cool. When would you use it? So Max actually makes a really good comment. It says, HTML is now utterly powerless. You are correct. You're seeing the power. Like, this is insane. This power is insane. But really, this allows you to do that exact scenario where I talked about where you've got your whole web page done, your design team or marketing team comes in and says, we need to swap these divs, and we need to do it now. Well, you now have the power using Flexbox in your order to do that. Okay, so let's kind of reset this for a second. Let's bring everything back to 0, the default value. Yes, and everything's back to its normal, like everything automatically, whether you knew it or not, has an order set to 0 when you do display Flex on children, on the Flex container items. So if we wanted to bring something to the front, how would we do that? Let's say we wanted to bring blog to the front without having to change all the order of everything. That's right, Andrew. Negative. Good job, Chaya. Yes, -1. So -1 would be less than 0, right? Hopefully you're going, oh, okay, yeah, that's not as hard as I thought. So this negative numbers can go to the front of the line. Isn't that cool? Order is so cool. Okay. That is order. Congratulations. All right, let's take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we will finish up our items, and then I'll give you a little challenge, and we'll talk about the project. 5-minute timer. 5-minute timer. Do it every day. Why do I keep messing up the time? There we go. Okay, now take a break. All right, let's finish strong. So we just finished talking about order, and order only applies to flex items. Okay, like let that sink in for a second. Order only applies to flex items. That means I could not use order on my nav, like on my nav item. Order would not work here. That's not going to fly. It's going to not work. So understand that order is not something that we can use. It's only for children. And technically, Andrew and all of us listening and learning, the children are what? What do they call it, Andrew? Flex what? Close. Yes. Thanks for letting me pick on you. Thank you for helping him out. So flex items. Now, what is the parent? What is it called? A flex what? It's right in front of you in the code. It's container right there. Very good. I want to make sure that we revisit these things because trust me, I do not expect you to learn this stuff because I taught it to you one time. You need multiple exposures to the same concepts. So that's why I highly recommend you go and walk through this again later if you're confused by anything. Okay, speaking of this documentation, there's some interesting stuff that I don't even want to talk about right now because it doesn't really impact us positively, but it could impact us negatively. Meaning it's kind of like baseline where you don't need to use it every day, but if you're interested in it, go check it out. Flex Grow is one of those things. Flex Grow defines the ability for a flex item to grow if necessary. It accepts a unitless value that serves as a proportion. So it's a proportion-based. Pretty cool stuff, but we don't need to worry about it to get your project done. And honestly, I don't use Flex Grow very much in my development. And so for those reasons, I'm going to let you figure that out on your own, but don't worry about it. It's not part of today, so you can skip over it mentally. Gina, no worries. This is all recorded, so you'll be fine. Okay, with Flex Shrink, same kind of thing. The biggest thing with grow and shrink is the if necessary. So we're going to skip it for now. It doesn't really add anything to our toolkit for what we're doing today. Same with Flex Basis because it all has to do with growing and shrinking as well. And Flex as well because it's just a shorthand of those two things. So we're going to skip over these four things because they just don't really help us today. And honestly, in the future, they're just kind of cool things. But what will help us is what some of you are asking for, is align self. So individual items being manipulated instead of all four. So remember, when I say align, I just said it. What axis are you going to look at? Align equals what? Cross. That's right. Justify is main. Align is cross. Whatever you need to do to get that in your head. So we have align dash self is the last property we're going to be talking about with our items. So over here, individual items, remember. So it's going to be in each A tag. It does matter. So let's go ahead. I'll put it inside of home. And we'll look at this as a way to reference it. And actually, you know what? I'll put it above all of our individuals. And then that's where we'll use this comment so you can pepper them throughout your stuff. Okay, let me hit save. So let's try this on the home tag. Since it's red, it's easy to see. So watch this, align dash self. So first off, if we do auto, let's see what happens. It automatically aligns with everything. That's the default value. Actually, I think stretch is the default value. So let's look at flex start. Well, not much to do here because everything's already at the top of the page, right? So, but this would matter if we were using our parent to move everything to the bottom. But we'll see this difference when we do flex end. There it is. The individual item is on its own little axis journey now. It's on the cross axis. And of course, we can do center. So it's going to center that item. And then baseline, again, we'll go with the text, which is at the top of the page. And then stretch, if we had a background color, we would see, well, let's do it. We would see that it stretches all the way down. Okay? And so that's it. I mean, that's Flexbox module. But let's go ahead and play around with some different items so we can see this in action. So let's say we center the home. Let's then go to the about and do something else. Let's do flex end, so it goes to the end. And then let's go to our blog. And we could do baseline and see how that works. So it tries to line up with its next item. And then if we go to align self on contact, and we do center. So notice something interesting on baseline. It's trying to stay in the source order as baseline. So up here, the source order in which we originally had the content, it's trying to stick with it. So that's kind of fun to see. Isn't that crazy? We can control each item on each cross axis. Now, if we wanted to flip it on its head, remember we have that ability to go back to the parent and change row to column, and then all of our stuff would go and flip on its head, right? Because now our main axis is top to bottom, and our cross axis is left to right. So just remember that flex direction is monumental. It's so important to understand. And the default is row. There you go. That is Flexbox. Isn't that cool? It's so cool. And it's so helpful. And this is what we're going to be using for the rest of your time here at Lambda School. So breathe easy. But now you really understand what inline block and inline block do. Like you've got that pain and you've got that remembrance to help you, because inline block and block, like not everything's going to be displayed flex for the rest of your life. Like it's only when you want to use layout pieces. So if you've got a block level element that's doing just fine and doesn't need a Flexbox element, then don't mess with it. Don't mess with a good thing. All right, so let's build a little bit of a layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this page here. I'm going to make a new pen. I've got some code that I've already built in preparation for this. Okay. So we've talked about like the theory, but let's get into some reality here. Because today in your project, you're going to have a home page and you're going to have a services page added on to that now, multiple page website. So I don't have the luxury of showing you my computer screen because it's too wide. You saw it yesterday, how nasty, crazy wide it is. So I am limited to sharing my Windows screen. To share that Windows screen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I can use and mimic a multi-page website in one page of CSS. I'm going to teach you how to do this. With Flexbox and Box Model, it's all coming together to build layout today. So let's say that we have this navigation system that's going to be across multiple pages, right? It's going to be on the home page. It's also going to be on the services page. It could be on the about page. So that means it's going to be global. It's going to be across multiple pages. So one of the first styles that I want to bring into my page, we talked about it today. What do you think is one of the most important styles that I could put at the top of the page before I do anything? How can I start building a project from scratch? Yes, box sizing, very good. And James, you're not wrong about the reset. Those are both, I was looking for both of those answers. So here's how it works. Star selector, right? Open, close, curly, box sizing border box. So immediately now, all of my padding and stuff is going to be fine. Also, I'm going to bring in, so we'll just do like layout example. Let me give you this code so Kai doesn't have to memorize the URL and type it. All right, so we've got this box sizing border box. That's the first thing I want to do across my whole web page. And in fact, I'm going to write myself a little note that says general styles. These general styles are going to go across all my pages. So it's wise of me to write myself and the future developer a note letting myself know what I'm doing here. Okay, so I've got my star selector and then the reset. So I'm going to go into my settings. I'm going to turn on my reset so I can reset all my stuff and own my code. Now remember, the reset that you're getting in your project is a big swath of code at the top, and it caused a lot of confusion for some of you. So you know what? In fact, to remove said confusion, I'm just going to go put it in here. So Eric Meyer reset. I'm going to grab this and just code as if this was a real project right now. And I'm going to get rid of my magical CodePen CSS reset. I'm going to pop it at the top of the page. So the same thing occurred. So notice whenever you start a project, there's a big nasty chunk of code at the top that resets everything to 0. At the top of the page. Get it? Top of the page. If you put this at the bottom of the page, you're going to have a rough time because it's going to try to reset all your styles to 0. I laugh because I've done it to myself. So don't do that. That's going to hurt. So put your reset at the top of the page. So again, you've got your reset. Here's the comment where it came from. Now under the reset, I'm going to now use my general styles, and that's where I'm going to do box sizing border box. Okay, I feel like this was missing yesterday, so that's why I'm talking about it. Now I can start coding. I've got the base reset. I'm set to 0. I've got my box sizing border box. I'm now prepared to start building layout. So at this point, I've got to look at my HTML. So if I minimize my divs, you can see I've got 2 containers, but one container needs to be my services page. One container needs to be my home page. There's a big distinction there. So what I can do is I can use container, and then I can actually put another class. We talked about this in brief, but I'm going to readdress it. Multiple classes are just fine. They give us another level of specificity without having to jump to IDs. So what class has precedence? Does anybody know? Container or home? Does it matter? This is not a trick question, but it is tricky. So David says the more specific one, and that is correct. So Addison takes it further and says, whichever is listed last in the style sheet. Boom. Good job, Addison. So Addison nailed it right on the head. So that means it doesn't matter if so in this case, in the source order up here, you would think that home would be more specific. I think that's a good guess. I would have guessed that too, by the way. But if container is below home and they're equal, guess what? Container wins. So be careful about that. So if I did home like that. So why do I have 2 classes? What value does that bring? Does anybody know? Why do I have container and I have home? Inheritance and specificity. Both Sean and James nailed it. That's right. Container is more general. Very good. Very good, Sean, separating the 2. So here's how this works. We can use container as our big layout div that we can use presentationally. So what I mean by that is, make sure I spell it right. I can give both containers the same width. So let's do like 600 px. I can give both containers a margin 0 auto and center them. You see the value of these right now? Like having container on both. But now if I want to have separate styles, so for example, what if I wanted to have some separation on my services page or something different on services? Well, now I can use my services selector and start building my selector chains here for services only. And then here, I can use my home for home only. Isn't that cool? Just a little tweak of the CSS, a little knowledge gap there. And we can do some really cool stuff. So let me show you what I mean. Under home, we could say all items are going to be red. See how home has red items now? And all services items are still black? This is the advantage of using multiple classes. I can get all the advantages of my container, but I can still be unique inside of my individual selectors. This pattern is seen over and over inside of CSS. Using multiple classes for different levels of specificity, even though technically they're on the same level. But because they are lower in the page, they trump each other. So knowing that services is going to come after home, I'm going to have services lower than home because it's going to be on a separate page. And this is how it works. So this is how massive web pages have one style sheet. Like if you go to these huge websites, they'll have one style sheet because they know that if they put the page lower in the page, that the CSS specificity won't fight itself. Andrew says, why not use star selector? Can anybody answer that? Why not use star selector to do this right here? What do you guys think? Sean nailed it. David's right. Because it would apply it to everything, right, Andrew? So it would try to put a width on like every P tag, and it would try to do margin auto on every image. It would be madness. So the star selector is really unique. It's really only used. I only ever use it for box sizing border box. So I'm really glad you said that, Andrew. That was a really good observation. Look at that. Light bulbs are going off. See, Andrew, I'm glad you said that. Same reason global variables are dangerous. That's exactly right. So at this point, though, ironically, everything is global because we're only one deep, right? Like when you have one deep selector, we are still in our general styles. But to be more specific, we can now copy and paste this and say, all right, these are going to be my home styles. Then these are going to be my services styles. And then we can go from here. So this is how you're going to be building your project today on one CSS page. So you're going to have all your home styles. And by the way, you can just copy and paste them from yesterday if you want. And then at the bottom of the page, introduce your services tag. Okay, so let's push this further and keep looking at this. So one of the things that was global was this header up here, right? This thing is going to be on both pages. So we can keep it under the general styles organization in our code. So I could come over here and say container, just to make sure it's not related to home or services. And then I can come in here and say header, right? So now I've got my container, which is inside of, or my header, which is inside of container. And look at this, I've got an image tag and a nav. Oh, maybe I can use display flex. So if I come over here, I say display flex, and now you can see my navigation starting to line up as a flex items. Okay, so if I look at my logo, it's kind of out of control. It's this massive 400 by 400. So the first thing I probably want to do is get that thing under control. So I'm going to come over here, copy and paste my selector. Notice what I'm doing, everybody. I'm using container, container, container. This is a general style. It's going to be on multiple pages. That's why I keep using container and not home or services. So now I've got my container, my header, and inside of header, I've got my logo, right? So there's my specificity chain. Yes, I could write it like that, but I'm not worried. I'm just going to say logo. At this point, I probably want to make my logo a lot smaller. Knowing that it's a 400 by 400, at least I know the dimensions can be the same. So I'm going to say width. Let's do 50 by 50 and see how that looks. Much better. Now I could actually add a border radius to make it look cool, like a circle or something. Neat. So now I've got my logo. The problem is I want to have my navigation on the right side of the page. So does anybody remember what I can do inside of my Flex container to achieve that? Do you remember the property? So we're already displayed Flex, so you're right, Thomas. Okay, you're saying justify, and okay, good job. We're slowly getting the syntax. Justify content. And then you guys are saying Flex end. Let's try it out. Wah, wah, so close. So why did that happen? Remember, everything goes on the main axis. Oh, Dennis says space between. Let's try it out. Oh, yeah. We get the space between. Dave Matthews Band going through my head right now. So with this justified content, we now have our navigation on the right. We've got our logo on the left. We're starting to see some semblance. Now, what if we wanted this navigation to be centered inside of our div, inside of our header? So remember, header looks like this. If we do border 1px solid red, we can see what the header is, right? So how do I get this content centered in the middle here? Okay, so I'm seeing align center, align items. Okay, let's try that out. So if we come in here and say align items center. All right, isn't that cool? Wasn't that so easy compared to yesterday? I just laugh because it's so better, so much better. Okay, so we've used Flexbox. We're feeling good, we're feeling confident, but we don't have separation between our homepage content and our header. So how can we get some separation between this navigation system and our content below, knowing that it needs to be across, every page? What can we do here? Do we use box model? Do we use Flexbox? What can we do? Margin. So David says flex or box model. So in this case, you're exactly right. Now, do you guys remember how to apply margin to just one side? Let's say we wanted just margin bottom here. That's right. So margin dash bottom, and then let's just throw in 50px to give ourselves some breathing room. Okay, maybe that was too much. Maybe 20. Isn't that cool? Do you see how I'm putting all our learning together? We've got box model. We've got Flexbox. We've got all of our CSS properties, like width and height. They're all working together to start building these layout pieces together. So instead of like these silly little boxes that we learned how to move around, we're actually building some interface at this point. And so now I can take off my border because I'm feeling comfortable with where my div is at. It starts to look really good. Now, again, these things are probably too close together. So do you guys remember how we can separate them a little bit? So first off, I've got to get the selector chain correct, right? So I've got to come in here, say container, header, and instead of the logo, look at my HTML, I've got this nav here, right? Nav. Okay, so you guys are saying space between, but here's a problem. Nav in its current incarnation does not have display flex on it, right? Like nav doesn't have display flex. It's just a child. It's not an actual flex container itself. So there's two ways we could do this. The first way is we just go right into our A tags and introduce some margin, right? Let's see if that works though. Okay, so it does work, but remember, because it's an inline element, it's only going to give us our left and right. So top and bottom really doesn't matter. So that works. But we could go further with our Flexbox knowledge, go into our nav and say display flex. That's right, I just displayed flex on what used to be a child, a flex item. This is valid code because remember, it's only one deep. So I've just displayed flex on my nav now. So you guys were saying justify content. What were you wanting? Space between? huh, nothing's happening. Why? Why is nothing happening here? So David says you need to have a width on the navigation. That's exactly right. So if we have no, well, first off, let me show you the border around this thing. Do you see why that doesn't work, everybody? Like we can't do space between if there's no space to be had. So we have to make sure that there's a width. So if we say width and we do like 300, now there's a place to have space between. Hopefully that takes a lot of the magic out of it. You're going, oh, that's really cool. And notice what's really, really cool is that the space between in our above parent element didn't lose sleep at all, just readjusted. That is the beauty of Flexbox, my friends. Right there. This exact example is the power of Flexbox because it automatically adjusted our width. Whereas if you did this with inline block yesterday and tried to float right with all this crazy stuff and position them, it would be madness. We just did two simple properties, display flex, justify content, and then we added a width. Like, come on, that's easy. That's awesome. And now our navigation is starting to sing. So this is how I start to build layout. This is how I think and work when I build projects. So we've got our general styles here. Our time is up now. And so if we wanted to look at our services page versus our home page, well, now we can start using our services and homepage selectors. So let's say I wanted the homepage contents, I think it's an H1. Let me go see. Main content, there it is. So my homepage content, I want it to be a certain size. So let's just do that really quick, and then I'll do the services, and then we'll be done. If you're feeling comfortable with everything I'm talking about, you're free to go to lunch at this point. So within my home tag, I'm going to jump in from my home. I'm going to ignore header because header's global, right? It's on every page. And now I'm going to go into this section that has a class of main content. So then I'm going to say main-content. So home is right there, main content. So notice that I'm skipping over header. It doesn't matter. It's the sibling. So in this case, I now know that I'm specifically in the home version under my main content, and then I can grab the H1. So here's my H1. And notice that it swapped the color to red there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say font size, we'll do 24px. Looking good. Now, I'm also going, because of my reset, you know, my H1 is just jammed in there. So I can actually go back up to my general styles, like way up to my general styles here, before I started getting into my container and go elemental level. So H1, and I can say all my H1s ever are going to have a margin bottom of 20px. That way, the services page and the home page will get that inheritance. Isn't that cool? So now all my H1s have this nice margin bottom on them. I don't have to think about it ever again. It's just automatic. That is the power of the cascade in CSS. But notice that the homepage content is 24 pixels in red, and my services does not have anything on it. Well, let's say that I wanted all of my H1s to look the same. Well, it's as simple as copying and pasting. So I can go up here, come in there, and now I'm going to get both my H1s to look the same. Hopefully some light bulbs are going off in your head and you're going, man, CSS specificity and inheritance matters at all times, because you have to be careful about what you're styling. So in this case, I've got my homepage content, and you could even make a case for the P tags. Also, they need some margin. So if we come down here, we introduce our global P tags, and we say, okay, all P tags should at least have a font size of 16px, and they should also have a margin, because remember, they're block level elements. We can do this, of 10px top and bottom, but we don't want to mess around with the left and right, so we'll do 0. And then we can introduce a new property you probably don't know about called letter spacing. And letter spacing allows us to have space vertically between our letters, so we can actually do, oh, sorry, I meant to say line height. I don't want to do letter spacing right now. Line height is our vertical spacing, and it's unitless. So you're not supposed to use PX. You can use PX, but you're not supposed to. So if we did 1, watch the difference in our height. Nothing changes because that's the default value. If I do 1.5, it'll do 1.5 spacing equivalent. See how that jumps like that? I can do 1.25 if I wanted to get not looking so bad. And you can kind of play around with these numbers to see where you want to be. So now it's easier to read your content because it's not so jammed on top of itself. So that's really, really cool. That's called line height. So now we're starting to look like an awesome web page. So if we come down, we've got these general styles now that are being applied everywhere. And now if I come down, let's do something specific here. So let's say I want my color on my H1 to be different. Let's say I want it to be actually crimson and not red. So it matches my Lambda logo a little bit closer. And in fact, I can match it directly with an eyedropper tool here. I can go grab the hex code and just get it to match exactly with what I want. So now that matches the logo to the T. Pretty cool. So now I've got my H1. Now let's say I wanted to make my services page content H1 different. Well, I know that the structure is the same, so I could literally just do this. But let's say we wanted to make it green just so it looks different and we can see the difference. So this is how you will style your pages today. You'll have a home page content that's going to look different, and then a services page content that's going to have a totally different layout. So let's go look at the project. I've given you a new design file for a services page. All right. The services page looks intimidating at first, but aren't you just repeating the same styles 6 times? So you should only have to build this 1 time and then use Flexbox, right? Like hopefully you're seeing things aren't as scary as they used to be with Flexbox and our box model skills now. So this shouldn't actually be as hard as you think, but the first time you see it, it's like, oh my gosh. And then as you look at it, you go, oh, that's not so scary. I've got to build 1 box in a class and then repeat that 6 times with, the content's the hardest part and it's already provided to you. You just got to wrap your divs around it. Hopefully you're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. So in our services page, we could put a class on this page for services, right? Yeah, we can. We can put a container on top of it, just like I showed you in this layout example. You could do the same thing. So your goal today is to build this new layout using all of your skills that you've gained up here, using Flexbox, using box model, inline if you need it, block if you need it, all of your skills combined to make the services page. One of the requirements I would like you to do is to rebuild your homepage using Flexbox. You'll see that it's not a lot of rebuild. It's not a lot. Or start from scratch. If you feel like it was just pulling hair out, you can start from scratch here. But I actually want you to do the services page first. So go do the services page and then go redo the homepage if you have time. So here's the objectives. Refactor the homepage with Flexbox where you're using inline before. I've just told you though, I want you to do the services page first so you're not like fighting between 2 things. In your navigation, point the services anchor tag to the services page. So remember I talked to you about the A tags in our navigation. So if we want to go to our services page on our machine, I'm going to talk about this more after lunch, by the way. So if you're interested in this, I'm going to have this after lunch. But services will point to the other page inside of your folder structure. Notice the folder structure is all given to you here. So there's our services.html, no magic. I'm going from an A tag in my index file and pointing to my services page. Okay? After that, it's just copy and paste the content of your index file into your empty services HTML page. Delete any content inside there. So you're just going to take your code from yesterday. You should have been given solution from yesterday. You can use that solution if you would like, or just recode it from scratch if you want a challenge. So I'm talking about the home page. You were given, if you were not given, please reach out to your project manager and they will give you solution code. You should expect solution code now every day at the end of day in stand-up. There are a couple of days where the projects are so wide open we don't have a solution, but there's like 2 of those. So for the next 5 weeks, you should be getting solution code every day in the afternoon. All right, there are some stretch goals. If you want to push yourself forward, read them. But the general idea here is build the new services page, refactor the home page, and get them clickable between the two. I'm going to be talking about how you can set this project up later this afternoon, and I will record it. Okay, there you go, everybody. I went a little deeper today, but I think it was worth it because I feel like we were missing some pieces there, and hopefully this will help you feel better about where we're going with layout. All right, more of this to come in the afternoon. Go take a break, and I will hit the channel up probably 10 minutes after lunch to make sure you get a full hour since we went 10 minutes over today. And I will see you then if you come. If not, remember it's recorded, so don't lose sleep over it. Okay, guys.